Great. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lisa White. I'm the Director of Education at the Museum of Paleontology at UC Berkeley. I'm also chair of the AGU Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee. And together with my colleagues, we're thrilled to be able to welcome you. And we value your time, your participation, and we appreciate the enthusiastic response that you gave to this call. And as we proceed with our plan, we want to have our experts speak with you and value just the collective expertise that's in the room. And so we'll take full advantage of some time together to get your input on how we can progress as a community to make our institutions more diverse and inclusive. And we know these topics can certainly be challenging. They take a lot of effort. We all acknowledge there are no easy solutions, but that's why we're here. We're here because it's important to not only keep conversations going so that we can listen and learn from one another, but plenty of us are ready to act. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Hindrada Ali from Fort Hays State University. And I'm sure many of you have seen and also signed her petition. And so I will turn it over to her at this point for some remarks.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. And I really appreciate everybody who signed up to join this workshop. We think it's really important work. Like Lisa said, I am Hendrata Ali. I am an associate professor at Fort Hays State University in the city of Hays in Kansas. And I primarily work in exploration, geology, and aqueous geochemistry. So that is my assignment as a geoscientist. But recently, you may be familiar, I co-organized a petition with a group of fabulous geoscience leaders, a call for a robust anti-racism plan in the geosciences. And I think this is the reason why I'm here today, because more than 25,000 of you signed this petition. And like somebody recently said, it's more than a third of members of some of our largest geoscience societies. This goes to show that we really do have an awareness and a need for change in our community. We've also really had some interesting feedback from people who have kind of repurposed the petition for a variety of reasons. And then one of the questions I get a lot is why the petition and why that time? Basically, of course, following the events of the summer and being somebody who serves in many professional society committees, I was really distraught to attend meetings and be simultaneously visible and invisible. And it felt like what was impacting me as a Black person did not seem to translate to my peers who were meeting with me. And that is what caused my basically cry for help, and which, of course, I went on social media to request that my professional organizations kind of acknowledge that I was not okay. And following that, we had statements, and then following the statements, we felt like they were all behind several clicks. So we followed up with, first what was just supposed to be a letter to say, hey, can you put this up front so that people can see it? But then it spiraled, and thanks to the group of network and friends that I've made through the months and the years, we were able to pull together a really diverse group of individuals that I think represented different communities of underrepresented minorities. So we really truly felt that we don't want to wait for another traumatic event to happen to somebody in another minoritized community so that we can cry out for attention or for change. We thought it is important to take the opportunity and speak to the problems that affect different communities: ability, disability, gender diversity, and identities, women, Black people, indigenous, Latinx. All of these people, we have a lot in common, even if we come at it from different angles. And that is a motivation that caused us to reach out to people from all these different backgrounds to contribute to this petition that everybody really seems to, most people, not everybody. There have been some not so nice counter petitions that I've seen, but most people have really embraced it and are willing to engage with it. And so we're here today to kind of find a way forward and maybe hopefully change and contribute to a change in our community of geoscientists. Thank you so much. I think I would pass it over to Brennan to take it away.
Thanks, Indrada. It's an honor to be following you up and here at GSA, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to a very different audience than I'm used to. You know, listening to Indrada, it was like listening to some of the things that were going on in my head earlier this year. The year's been a blur. I was at Howard University at the time, and when I was at Howard University, I directed a research center, large 13-member consortium of academic institutions. And I was conducting a business meeting. And this was back in February or so, and Ahmaud Arbery had just been killed running and then running away from his murderers. And as a Black man who used to live in Atlanta, my brother is still in Atlanta, I run. That struck me in a way that was just so deeply troubling, and how it was commodified on TV. It was one of many other killings. There's been over almost 200 killings of Black men and women this year. There's more than one a week. And it had just become, even by that time, so regularized that it was normal to, on a week, see that someone else had been killed. And I was trying to conduct the meeting, and it all came to a head, and I couldn't remember what I was there to talk about anymore. And it was extremely frustrating. And then I let out what was in my head to that group of folks. Basically closed the meeting with me venting my frustrations with the fact that we're just going on as scientists. We have to be hyper competitive. We have to reach our metrics. We have to publish our papers. We have to do our research no matter what happens. And it was negating to who I was. I see myself being killed. I see my sisters being killed. I see my mother being killed, my father's in the street every week. But I'm just going to go about work because that's what we do. And then the pandemic hit. And that spun up in a way that had so many devastating effects in the HBCU community, in the communities that we serve. And again, it was as if our community was just marching forward, doing what we got to do. We got to keep our labs open. We got to keep the grants rolling. We've got to, keep doing what we do. And I felt so disillusioned that, again, I wrote a long email to my colleagues, and they said, Vernon, why don't you just write a letter? Not as if to brush me off, but to say, look, put it together. And I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of colleagues who I can bounce ideas off of. And ultimately, as we were moving forward, as Indrada mentioned, a group of one of the beautiful things about geosciences, actually, is that we are so diverse and interdisciplinary that many of us have these broad networks of friends and colleagues and expertise that we bring together, but there's a common experience throughout. And so I started putting the letter together and bouncing it off of folks. And in a similar way, it just spiraled into something that we said, well, let's put this out there. Actually, I saw Indrada's call about a week before we were supposed to send it out. Oh, there's a call that's already out. Let's do that. I said, everybody sign it. But we felt in no time for silence that we needed to call people out a little more specifically, that we needed to address systemic racisms, particular forms of oppression and hierarchies that need to be disrupted, and give very specific advice beyond the individual to the procedural. And so a great group of folks came together to sign on to that, to make something public. And there has been a very significant and positive response, and I appreciate that. Appreciate it throughout the community, the geoscience community, the STEM community, and also within the federal agencies, the professional societies, the FFRDCs, even within the academy. There's been students and faculty and staff and administrators who've really stepped up. The 3 points that I'd emphasize, and I think these are essentially common, this is a we problem. It's not a they problem, those racists over there, or those Latinx, or those Black people over there. It's a we problem. It's not an it problem. It's so hard. It's taken so long. It's not enough. It's a we problem. And if we don't commit to solving it, then it's on us. It really is on us. I think we're flippant about progress not happening or not happening fast enough, but I think it's dangerous to say that there has been no progress. There have been thousands of PhDs, BIPOC PhDs in geoscience in the last 40 years. There have been thousands of BS and MS and certificate holders who are all out making an impact. HBCUs have been producing 60% of the Black PhDs in atmospheric sciences, 30% of Black marine sciences PhDs. This was not possible before the last 40 years. Probably wasn't that possible before the last 20 years. So we've made huge progress, not at the rate that we need to make. Not as a community, we have not made the progress. And that's what we need to specify. We need to be specific in our language. We need to be specific in our action. And the third point is that beyond, and these conversations are extremely important, and empathy is extremely important. Action is inspired, intentional, progressive action is the most important thing. We've got to move beyond the words, and that's what I think both of these calls are asking. And I think it's a huge reason why folks are here today to work. And so I want to close and say, again, thanks a lot to Indrada for your leadership, to the societies that have bound together to support this, Billy and AGU, certainly Lisa and all the folks. If I listed all the folks, we'd be out of time by the time I finish. So I apologize for all the folks who've contributed in a really meaningful way to this effort and continue to inspire action. So thanks.
Thank you, Vernon. Thank you, Indrada. And as Vernon mentioned, there really are so many people that have inspired this work that we are continuing to work with to make progress. And you will meet some of them in just a minute because they will be facilitating in our breakout groups. And I want to also encourage you all to look at the chat. So there have been some great comments already. There are links to the 2 petitions in the chat, and we shared them with you when you registered for this session. But a number of the comments just reinforce that we can make progress. We are capable of doing multiple tasks and major things at once. We know there are plenty of structural barriers in our way, but look at what's been done in previous decades to even progress to the point where we are. So we want to take this momentum. We want to take advantage of some collective action and ideas to see how we can help one another in diversifying our field of geosciences. So if we could go to the next slide. Let's see, Brielle, are there instruction? Okay, so breakout room discussion. So what we are going to do is we're going to break out into 12 different rooms. And in the room, there will be at least one facilitator. And more importantly, we'll share with you, the facilitator will, a link to a Jamboard. So we're going to use the Jamboard system in order to collect ideas from you, via note. So it's a great way for groups to share and write and post what it is that they're thinking about. So the questions that we posed in the registration form will be replicated in the Jamboards. And so we'll use that to help get discussion going. We are eager to get input from you. And so that's the plan for the next 25 minutes. We'll spend that time sharing ideas and thoughts and experiences in the Google Jamboards. And then after that, we'll spend our last few minutes summarizing where we are, and we'll share some next steps as we continue to offer a series of webinars to move us to action. So just give us a minute to get you into the breakout groups, and we will see you there. I'm just looking at my notes here. I'll ask them to go first.
That's very exciting that I get to go first, because then there won't be anything taken. We talked a lot about questioning unspoken rules and having difficult conversations. So those were things that resonated with people. Having difficult conversations, something very important is to acknowledge at the beginning that we're all going to make mistakes as we do this, and that we're going to work together to work through this. And it's okay if we make mistakes, because that's the best way that we're going to learn. So making people feel a little bit more at ease with going forward and really addressing some of these challenges, having the conversations.
Great. Thank you, Amy. And next we have, so I'll call on Julie. So that was Breakout Group 11 to share.
Yeah, so I think one thing that I took away from our conversation was this idea of tensions, the way that we kind of talked about things. So this idea of the value of hearing the lived experiences of our colleagues who are from various groups. And that also is valuable for everyone to hear, but it also asks folks to relive trauma. And so that tension of how we become, we learn, but also are mindful of our colleagues. But I also heard this idea of this tension with, we want to learn and become aware through diversity training, but we know that that's only awareness. It doesn't go to action. So how do we go beyond that piece of it? And then I thought this really interesting thing of, engaging short-term and long-term, small scale and large scale. And then there was a comment about access to information to enable us to do our work. So those were some of the notes that I had from our conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. Okay, so next breakout 10, we'll go to Ingrid.
Hi, everyone. So something that came up frequently in our group was that there is individual initiative for implementation of calls to action, but typically there's no progress at the top due to lack of support and leadership in the departmental level and beyond.
How true, and thank you for that. Okay, so Pranoti, you had breakout group 9.
Right, so we have lots of wonderful ideas and notes for you to look at in our Jamboard, but the main thing that came out was the empowering students to do DEI work, and if they do, to recognize that effort. So So that was one of the things that came out. And the other thing was sort of, we never have enough time. You know, time is always a huge constraint and big challenge and a barrier. And one last thing is that the work that people who do DEI work is not recognized in promotion and tenure criteria. So those are the things we discussed amongst many, many others.
Great. Okay, so Margaret, Breakout Group 8.
Yes, we began by discussing barriers and how even if you're able to make some positive changes within your department or horizontally, it can often be difficult to translate those up vertically. And so we had a rich discussion around accountability and making people accountable, going beyond the statement and saying, yeah, those actions sound good, but actually holding them to doing those things. And so like Pranoti said, making DE&I work part of the tenure process, changing bylaws to value and reward this work, and using my favorite phrase, you know, blowing up the system.
Yep, and that's become my favorite phrase too. We're just gonna blow this whole thing up, right, Margaret? All right, so Breakout 7, Billy.
Yeah, so we had a very rich discussion in our group as well. On the positive side, we saw that there's now a very wide range of interest in moving things forward with action plans. Some negatives were that since there's so much interest now, there's concern about overtaxing members of underrepresented group for their investment in this work, that it can be emotionally draining as well. And also a concern about some external forces at play that we have to be aware of and be steady against in terms of some federal barriers.
Great. Okay, so Kathleen, hearing from Breakout Group 6.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. Time went by very quickly. We spent a lot of time talking about some of the issues that have already been raised. So issues about how to, so everyone's formed a new committee or task forces at so many institutions, but how to actually hold those committees and other faculty accountable to actually do these changes is really a challenge, especially given the time constraints that have already been raised, as well as the sort of minority tax issues, which is the fact that, you know, so many URM or minoritized scientists are the ones doing a lot of this work. And it is stressful and time consuming and isn't necessarily valued in our promotion. So I think one sort of strategy that was discussed was that rather than try and force everybody else to do the work, we need to make sure that our institutions are valuing the work that is being done and being considered for promotions, and not only at the faculty level, but also valuing student work and allowing students time to focus on this work as well as their research, because it should be viewed as equally important.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so Tessa for Breakout Group 5.
Great. So we had a great discussion that actually mirrored quite a few of the comments that have just been made. So I'll just try to I'll sprinkle in a few additional things we talked about. We did talk about types of service that are valued and not valued in academic circles, and that DEI related services often falls on very few people to carry all of the load and is not always valued. We highlighted some ways that institutions are putting resources towards DEI efforts and starting to spend money on this, which people really appreciated. We also talked about the need to hold people accountable for harmful behaviors, and that could happen either via academic institutions or even scientific societies. And we sort of ended on a note of talking about the role and importance of scientific societies in taking leadership in this.
Great. Okay, so many wonderful ideas and suggestions and strategies. So for Breakout Group 4, Ray?
Yes, so many people in my group talked about the things that they're personally doing on an individual level, making their own teaching more inclusive and equitable. One of the challenges that my group brought up is that our white male colleagues tend not to show up for anti-racism efforts. And so we looked around our group, our entire group was made up of women of color and white women. And there was just this resounding sort of continued frustration that the same people show up in the room every time. And so one of our takeaways is that we need allies in this work. And so we need to figure out ways to bring our colleagues into these conversations who would normally not be here, wouldn't care, wouldn't be considering the impacts of this deeply embedded racism in our higher ed institutions and geoscience fields in particular.
Great. Okay, so breakout group 3, Benjamin.
Yeah, thank you. At the end here, I'll echo some of the things that have been said before. We had a fantastic discussion. This sense that we need to start getting more people into the room so this conversation is shared came through strongly. We had a great talk about when we frame things as we're gonna make mistakes, there can be a lack of accountability, and we need to be thinking about the mistakes cause harm, and people need to be held accountable and see opportunities for learning from the process, but seeing that as part of a long-term commitment rather than relying on short-term fixes. Something that came up is the need for brave leadership, as well as community building, coalition building across people who are at different levels in their careers. There was a sense that there's strong push from graduate students to address a lot of issues, and that can lead to resentment from faculty. That was one of the specifics that came up. So a solution that was proposed is having more empathy and trying to develop partnerships between people at different stages so that they can advance their goals together.
That's fantastic. And so many helpful points raised, and ones that are definitely actionable strategies. Okay, so for breakout 2, we're asking Aradha to update us.
Great, so it was really exciting to see the different things that people discussed they were doing. A common element that came up from multiple people was having a DEI task force or committee working on plans, and also having specifically DEI put into the broader strategic plan of an institution. There's also discussion about how some institutions are actually presenting results on what they're doing at conferences as a way to basically elevate the leadership that is occurring. There also are mentorship programs that were talked about, one with multiple mentors, some that are skill-based. I think some of the challenges that came up from people were ones that have already been discussed, but one of the suggestions was a need for targeted racial hiring, because what we're doing is not giving us racial diversity in our departments, and also really thinking about what we do as part of a broader strategy that can help with achieving systemic change at our institutions.
Fantastic. Okay, well, for group 1, and so much of what's been shared is similar to some of the things in our notes in the Jamboard. And reflecting on maybe something that wasn't specified so much in all of your responses is that, we acknowledge it's a big problem. We've been behind in diversifying efforts for decades, and it's easy to feel very overwhelmed in a department on where to start. And by the time you subtract out people that aren't going to help you, who aren't motivated and don't really see it as their priority, then that does leave, those few that are always burdened. But perhaps one way to think about this is, as was shared with our group, is perhaps being more strategic about the plans and the actions for, if we're talking or if we're going to tackle first student diversity in our department, what sorts of resources are we going to need and what kind of assistance? If we are targeting our efforts on faculty hiring and diversity, then what does that mean for moving forward? Or is it that we want to spend the time on inclusivity in our teaching and learning, and so that will require a whole nother set of approaches and strategies? So if departments can begin, or units, workplace can begin to think about being more strategic and organized in that way, and perhaps that could help with this. Wow. Okay. So we knew the hour would go by fast, and we only have 3 minutes. We have an additional slide that will serve as a reminder. Well, thank just to all the partners who have been useful to us in this effort. And we look forward to our continued work with them. We'll have an additional workshop at the AGU online conference in December, AMS in January. So there's plenty to look forward to in terms of continuing dialogue. And I just want to invite to, and the Jam boards will continue to be active, and we'll be sharing them as well. And with the 2 minutes we have, I want to invite, do any of the facilitators, my co-organizers have any remarks to make in our last 2 minutes?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, and I think continue to uplift the voices of the students and the next generation. Like I said, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, so the next giants coming through.
Yeah, we really want to highlight that with participating in this, we're really creating a community of practice across institutions. So we'll be coming back together at AGU and at these subsequent meetings, and we'd encourage all of you to come back so we can report back on what we're doing and highlight examples of things that we can go back to our departments with in these targeted areas that Lisa mentioned.
There's also an amazing group of people working across various organizations and pulling this together. And it was amazing to see it come together, and couldn't be more proud of the teamwork that took place.
Absolutely. And we, of course, thank GSA for promoting this, and of course, the AGU staff and many that are guided and work with Billy. The National Association of Black Geoscientists have inspired a lot of this work as well. So we want to be sure that we continue to work with them and with other organizations. And on that note, I'll just say you're welcome to all the nice thank yous in the chat. And, it's rare to be able to, I think, to come together with this collection of experts and, folks dedicated to DEI. So we want to continue to use the Zoom and virtual space for that. And so we certainly look forward to future dialogues, and wishing everyone a good evening, good rest of your week. If you're going to the last couple of days of GSA, then maybe we'll see you in some of those sessions too. And thank you so much. Okay, bye to everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Robin.
Thanks, you.
Bye.
Thanks, Brielle.
Yeah, thanks, Brielle. Quiet behind the scenes.
Brielle, you're a magician. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. All right. Let's see. Oh, Raquel joined Benjamin, although Raquel's, yay. How you doing? And how was the Pardee? I've been listening to some of the recordings from the Pardee session.
It went really well. Thank you for asking.
For us, it was always about training like a group of students to feel like they could be leaders, like, and go back. And so we had already weirdly completed our goal before yesterday, because we had 19 students train with us for the past few months, work with us to develop this workshop, and they pulled it off. So
they were incredible.
We were in a pretty good position to start out the day. And then, we didn't have too many difficulties. So I think
that's great, because there were technical challenges for a lot of yesterday.